Hello, I'm Bob Cialdini, a behavioral scientist and author of the book Influence, as well as the new book Pre-Suasion. And I'd like to tell you about a series of video interviews I've conducted with individuals who I admire and who have written about behavioral science not just for the academic community, but as well for the larger community. Individuals such as Dan Ariely, Adam Grant, Amy Cuddy, and Richard Thaler. In this series of interviews called Cialdini Asks, I try to get beneath the surface and behind the scenes, inquiring into the motivations that spurred the work of these individuals and their decisions to write about it for a popular audience. I also asked them about aspects of their work that exceeded their expectations in terms of impact, as well as those aspects of their work they felt have been most underappreciated. I even asked them to tell us a funny story or revealing one that nobody knows about them and their work. I know that in the process, I have been surprised, fascinated, and informed by their answers. I hope that the same will be true for you. So I do hope that you will look out for and tune in to the Cialdini Asks video series as we make it available online over the next several weeks. Thanks. Hi, Dan.
Hey, good to see you again.
It's good to see you.
Last time we met, was it in London in the BIT conference?
It was. I was impressed by that event, the extent to which behavioral science had become not just trendy, but a thing, a real thing that attracted a lot of people from a lot of different domains. So I was encouraged by that.
Yeah, no, it is. It is great. I mean, but for you, I think it's extra special because for how many years have you been trying to get people to use psychology to drive behavioral change?
Too many years for me to admit, but it's been a sizable number, yeah.
Yeah,
and also,
the way that they're using social proof so effectively in so many different areas is just wonderful, right? And you've been knocking on doors for lots of years, and all of a sudden, boom,
that
being
has
applied.
been heartening to me, and I think the key was to get it out of the academic domain where we found solid evidence of it to places where people who are using it are now seeing that they're getting positive outcomes for their own goals.
Yeah. So it was great. So and I think we're all riding on your coattails in this happiness of taking basic findings and trying to make an impact. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, that leads directly into my first question for you. And I've always been a big fan of your work, but I was especially taken by your most recent book, Payoff. In fact, I read it twice. Once for content, once for style, and was impressed both times. And I wonder if you can tell us about the series of events that led to your decision to write that book. That is, that made you decide to turn the research and ideas that you covered there into something directed not just to the academic community, but to the larger community.
Yeah. So I kind of my first attempt into write something beyond the academic community was when I wrote Predictably Irrational almost 10 years ago, and that was an interesting exercise because I kind of took a lot of myself. I kind of put a lot of myself into that book. Not in the sense of working hard, but in the sense of describing some of my interests, my challenges, and kind of personality and struggles. And it was I remember sending it off to the publisher and say, what have I done? It's a book that talks about my burns and removing bandages. And it's a social science book, but it was about my journey through life and how it led me to think. And the reaction I got was relatively positive. And And I remember sitting on a flight next to a woman who was a diabetic patient. And she was so happy I was sitting next to her because she said she read Predictably Rational. She said she was debating whether to have an insulin pump installed or whether to keep on taking injections. And in her mind, she had a debate with me about what I would say. And she decided I would say, go ahead and install an insulin pump. And that's what she did. And she asked me if that's true. So we went through the arguments and I said yes. And it was incredibly gratifying to talk to somebody who kind of took some of the findings, internalized it to their own lives and kind of thought about this.
Yeah.
And when I wrote my second book, The Upside of Irrationality, I was a bit more courageous even in the things I described. So, I described the first hard-on I had in hospital. But this book, I think, for me, is even a stronger deviation. And it doesn't start from research. It starts from my own questioning about how I spend my time.
Right.
And because I was badly injured and because I wrote about it in a very personal way, I get lots of people with injuries write me. Maybe a couple of times a week, I get people to write me. And all of those discussions are difficult and painful. I'll tell you one example, not one that is in the book, but about a year and a half ago, I get a very short email from somebody and said, I'm injured badly, please call me. And I called this guy in the evening, and it turns out it was about a year after he became paralyzed from the neck down. And at that point, he got to the realization he was not going to get better, and he wanted to kind of figure out what he can do, how he can find happiness and meaning and contribution and so on. And we talk about all kinds of ways to do it, and we decide on two paths. One was that he hated all of these books that said that injury was the best thing that ever happened to me. So we decided he was going to write something on his beliefs. And then he was going to help his uncle with the project he was working on. And then he asked me, what do I think about committing suicide? And I said, I'm not against it. I thought about it myself at times. But I said, we just have two other paths. Let's explore them first. So he agrees. And we talk once a week for the next few months about different progress. And he submits an outline and all kinds of things like that. And I try to help him out. And then at the end of those 4 months, he did commit suicide. And, there's lots of things about that case and many other cases. But, and I have lessons about him and, why I think he decided to commit suicide and so on. But, if I think about, he's not the only person I talk to. I talk to lots of people with these kind of things. And none of those are what you would call fun.
Right.
I don't have these discussions and burst into laughter. I don't. There's nothing about them that is joyful. In fact, if you looked at me from the outside, you would say I'm suffering, and I am. Right. It's painful and difficult, and sometimes I cry, and I have nightmares, and it's an engaging experience that you would not say it's pleasurable, and nevertheless, I find myself spending a lot of my time on those things, right? And the question I started asking is why? Right. We have this idea of pursuing happiness. Right. And in the standard definition of pursuing happiness, I'm kind of pursuing misery. Yeah. Now you can say maybe I'm a kind of an S&M kind of a person, and what I'm really after is misery, but that's not the case. I think what's the case is that happiness, there's kind of two types of happiness. There's the type of happiness that you get from sitting on the beach, drinking mojito, watching a sitcom, or something light and fun, and on a daily basis. But the type of happiness we should really pursue is the type of happiness that gives you meaning and satisfaction. And oddly, it doesn't come with daily happiness. It comes with daily misery. Yeah. So think about something like running a marathon. If you came from out of space and you recorded people running a marathon, you looked at them, you would say, these are terrible people. They must have done something terrible. Society punished them with this cruel punishment, and hopefully they will pay their debt to society when they finish and forgive them. And it's true that there's not a second in a marathon that somebody would say, this second is more pleasurable than watching YouTube.
Yeah.
But the experience as a whole gives people a sense of meaning and progress and achievement and overcoming and so on. So this book is really started with my struggle to figure out what kind of things drive me that seem on the surface to be so antagonistic to happiness, but in fact give me so much more of other things.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, and you know what? I have some answers, but not. It's like it's such a big open question, and I kind of took this book as an opportunity to explore it.
Yeah. It seems to me that the choice of the concept of motivation fits very well with the opportunity to explore on a lot of levels something that is central and incessantly part of what we do every day. You know, when I first wrote my book Influence, it turns out that concept has a lot of tendrils. It reaches all through our lives, and so it's turned out to be something that people have been interested in. The idea of motivation struck me when I read this. Oh yes, another one of those fundamental undergirding constructs that allow us interesting thinking and ways of behaving inside its borders. Yeah.
Yep, and much like Influence, I think it's going to be multi-determined, and there are many things going on at the same time, and there are many paths to the same aspect. So we're not going to have a simple, fun answer, but the exploration is wonderful.
Right. Well, let me go on to the next question. That was a great answer. This is a little more of a fun question. Of all the work you've done, what would you say has been most underappreciated? And why do you think that is?
Okay. So, underappreciated by who? I'll just take academics.
Yeah.
So we have this paper in which we try to get very poor people in Kenya to save money. And we created a system where people could text money into their M-Pesa account, their online phone account, and every night the money would move to an investment bank. So it would be easy to put the money in, but taking it out would be hard.
Mm-hmm.
And then we added all kinds of things to it. Some people just got that condition. Some people got a text message once a week. Try and save 100 shillings, about $1.
Mm-hmm.
Some people got a text message from their kids. Try and save 100 shillings for their family.
Yeah.
Some people got a 10% match. Some people got a 20% match. Some people got match with loss aversion. So we gave them the match in the beginning of the week.
Yeah, right.
And if they saved, they got to keep it. If not, we took it back.
Yeah.
And some people got the coin. The coin was golden color. It had 24 numbers on it. We asked them to put it somewhere in their hat. And we asked them every week to scratch the number for that week, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, to indicate if they saved or not saved. Because we don't have much time, I'll just tell you that when we ask people to predict the results, people think that 20% will get people to save a lot, 10% less, and 0 doesn't matter. Message from kids, coin, doesn't matter. What happened was that reminders help, text help, adding money to it, 10% helped. By the way, 10 and 20%, no difference. Loss aversion helps some more, but again, 10 and 20% don't matter. Kids were just like 10 or 20% plus loss aversion. So it means that the kids are incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
But the big surprise in that paper was the coin. The coin dramatically increased savings compared to everything else. And by the way, when you look at the results over the week, we texted everybody on a particular day. The coin did not have much benefit on that day. The benefit of the coin came from all the other days of the week, which suggests that from time to time people saw the coin. And from time to time they remembered, and from time to time they took an action. Now, here's the thing: the coin, we're not sure what's going on there. Like, we can speculate, right? And we can say, oh, we think it's about reminders, or we can say, we think about all of a sudden the family understands that there are savings, right? Because usually when you save, the only visible thing for the family is that you take things away from them.
Yeah.
There's less food on the table. Save or buy insurance, you're taking away from the family in the most direct way. All of a sudden, the family could see that they're getting something back. But academics don't like it. And maybe for a good reason. Like, certainly not all papers should have this character that says, hey, we had this really surprising result. We don't exactly know where it's coming from. But I think as academics, we have this mistake where we think that every paper should be somewhat complete.
Mm.
And I think we don't appreciate saying, hey, this is puzzling. Maybe we'll deal with it in another time. And it's enough to basically show the puzzle to stimulate more research and to show that it's working.
Right.
So I think, like, if I wrote that paper without the coin condition, but only loss aversion, 10%, 20%, it's a package. But you add a condition that is much more interesting, and all of a sudden, rather than making the paper more interesting, it makes it less interesting. So that I think is kind of a little bit of my frustration with how we think about papers, and I don't think we think enough about the accumulation of science as a process.
I don't think there are outlets specifically for those kinds of papers, although it would be very valuable if we had intriguing results and we don't quite know the way to explain them. What do you think, folks? Why can't we build a platform of research on this question? Because it exists as a phenomenon.
Yep. And in medicine, they have case studies.
Yeah.
Right? And side by side, they publish papers with the scientific method. And they also say, hey, here's a bizarre thing I observed. Let's think about it.
Great. Well, next question has to do with the flip side of the last question. Of all your work, what was most surprising to you in terms of its big impact? That is, it was more than you expected in terms of its impact.
Okay. So you mean impact in terms of experimental, not in terms of the effect of.
Then I'm going to allow you to move around categories. Where did you get oversized
effect
impact? Yeah.
So we did, as you know, we do all of these experiments to tempt people to steal money from us.
Right.
And we have all kinds of ways that people can exaggerate the results and get more money than they deserve. And in one experiment, we describe the experiment to people and we say, hey, we have these two methods here, two versions of the experiment. In one of them, the payment is up to $4. Another one is up to $40. Why don't you flip a coin and we'll see if you get the $4 experiment or the $40 experiment. People flipped the coin. No matter what they got, we said, you got the $4 version.
Right.
But now the research assistant looks around and he says, listen, my boss is not here today. So I'll tell you what, you got $3 to show up to the experiment. If you'll give me the money, I will pretend you got the other coin flip. So he's basically asking him for a bribe.
Yeah.
Now, what percentage of people bribed him? 90%. 90% bribed him, which is shocking.
Yeah.
And what did they do after the bribing? They moved from a $4 condition to a $40 condition. They were going to make much more money. They also increased their cheating, and they started stealing. And what do I mean by stealing? After they filled the task, they wrote down how much money they deserve, let's say $23, and they circle it. And then instead of paying them, we give them an envelope with $50 and we say, why don't you pay yourself the amount of money you deserve?
Yeah.
The amount of money you don't deserve, leave in the envelope. And as you leave the room, drop it in a big box of envelopes.
Right.
This was the first time we saw people stealing. Usually people write 23, like they cheat on the reporting, but once they write $23, they take $23. Yeah. Here we saw stealing.
Yeah.
And the effect, of course, is something that social psychologists would predict, which is that if the person running the system is corrupt, people switch very quickly and become corrupt.
Right. Yeah.
The magnitude of the people who are willing to pay the bribe And the ease in which they started stealing is incredibly disturbing. It's incredibly disturbing if you look at the politics around the world.
Yeah.
And you say, can you think about countries where the leadership seems to be corrupt
No.
or dishonest? And what are the odds that when people encounter that system, they will not become corrupt and dishonest themselves?
Right. That's reminiscent of an old set of studies I saw, not on cheating, not on stealing, on aggression. There's research by sociologists that show that after a war, after a country has engaged in warfare, whether they've won or lost, violence increases inside the country.
Yeah,
There are
including
more
domestic,
armed robberies.
and domestic violence as well.
Domestic. And it's not just from veterans who've returned from the wars. No, it's people who were never in war. No, when someone in charge endorses aggression as a way to solve problems, that has this trickle-down effect, similar to what I think you saw for lying and cheating, being endorsed by someone in charge.
Yeah.
Next question.
Can we make a happier question? I'm a little depressed now.
Okay. Yes, there is a happier question. In your experience as a researcher or author, I'm going to give you some latitude here. Is there a revealing or humorous story you can tell us that only a few people know?
Okay. So I'm not sure how humorous this is, but I grew up in Israel. I came to the US, and the first study I did was on beer. And I basically got undergrads to taste beer, either in a blind tasting condition or when they could see the beer. And I did it to freshmen, and I did it for seniors. Mm-hmm. And what I found was that freshmen, when they tasted the beer while seeing the cans, said they liked the heavy German beers more and the light American beers less. But when they drank without knowing what it is, they liked the light American beers first and the heavy German beers less.
Okay.
By the time people were seniors, they said they liked German beers more than the light American beers, and that's also how they liked them.
Wow.
So my conclusion was that the goal of college is, like you have a goal of thinking that you want to learn how to like heavy German beers, and through college you learn how to do it.
How to detect.
Now, the problem with that study was that I had no idea about drinking age. And I didn't understand the IRB. So it was an illegal study on many ways. Yeah. I was just a grad student in the first semester. I worked in the lab of Tom Walton, and I just kind of did this on the side for fun. And I basically got freshmen to drink. So I could never publish these results. So basically nobody knows about it. But I think it's a really, really fun, interesting result.
I think it is funny. So great. And then there's a last question. As you know, I've written a book recently called Pre-Suasion that explores what communicators do before delivering a message to increase its acceptance. So I wonder, can you describe a situation in which you've seen a communicator, it could be you, who said or did something first that led to the success of an immediately following appeal?
Yeah. So I'll tell you one of the things I do. So when I present, I always run the risk that people say, "Oh, but people are rational," or "I am rational," and so on. So what I now do, and I think it's successful, is before I talk about rationality and irrationality, I get the audience to admit some of their own mistakes. So I start by saying, how many of you in the last month have eaten more than you think you should? And I ask people to raise their hands, and virtually everybody raises their hand. And then I said, how many of you in the last month have not exercised as much as you have eaten more than you think you should? how many of you have ever texted and driving? Texting and driving is
Yeah.
kind of a clincher because
Right.
most people admit that they do it. And then there's just like, after people admit that they overeat, under-exercise, and text and drive, like, what can they say? Oh, yes, I'm rational. You can always say, but listen, don't you know that texting and driving is stupid? Haven't you just admitted that you said it? So I get people to admit that they fail, and because of the hand raising, that everybody around them fail. And that basically, I think, creates an openness
Right.
to it. The one thing I tried once that doesn't succeed is to ask people how many of them in the last month have not always washed their hands when they left the bathroom.
Ooh.
And the reason that one is not successful is not because people don't do it, it's because they don't admit it.
They don't want to admit it, especially if they're going to be shaking hands with
That's
other
right.
people in the audience.
That's right. So now, if I use that example, I say, look, you're all lying, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's no chance that you're all doing it. But
Yeah.
But what I want to do is I want people to go through a few things where they admit,
Yeah.
they are willing to admit publicly,
Yeah.
and they see everybody around them behaving this way. And after that, like, you can't really have arguments, yes, but people are rational.
Right.
So
Right.
you kind of establish that up front.
Yeah.
And I think the resistance to, because you see, when you talk about being rational, it's an abstract idea. When you translate in specific behavior that you say nobody's doing,
Yeah.
or everybody's behaving badly, now we're kind of starting the discussion in a very different state.
Yeah. Brilliant. I thought that's great. Well, thank you very much for taking time with us today. I enjoyed it. I always enjoy our interactions. This one especially. So.
Me
Thank
too.
you, and
And
congratulations on Payoff. It's really terrific.
thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to our next interaction.
Good. So long for now.
Take care. Bye.